Lawyers of Reddit, what's the worst way you've seen a person screw over someone else in court, whether it be criminal, civil, or divorce proceedings? Not a lawyer, but happened to me and some buddies in college. So a group of friends and I rented a 5-bedroom house in college. And being the group of guys, we were partied pretty hard and were really rough on the house. We knew going in we were not getting our deposit back. Well, part way though living there, the septic started to have some problems. Whenever someone used the downstairs shower, it would drain slowly, i.e. slowly fill as you used it. Also, one of the room's carpet would get wet. So we emailed the property service company to fix it. 2 weeks later they send out a plumber to snake the line and leave. Well, that didn't fix it. So we emailed again. 2-3 weeks. Plumber, snake, leave. Still not fixed. Email and 2-3 weeks and they scope the line. Turns out roots had grown into the line, so they had to do a big old process to completely remove all the roots. Now it's fixed. Well, we all move out. Go or separate ways. One of my buddies goes to Australia for 9 months. When he gets back he comes home to a bunch of voicemails. Turns out the property company is coming after us for like $5,000 on top of the deposit. They tried to pressure him into either paying the money or he would be taken to court. He told them he would see them in court. For the couple months leading up to the court date he would get calls telling him to pay and it would all go away. Day before the first day of court they call him and tell him to pay $2,000 and give them info for one of the other people on the original lease. He says go to heck and see you in court. First day of court is just to make sure everyone shows and to schedule the actual case. Lawyer for the property company shows up, is scrambling to figure out what is going on. Had no records beyond the original lease, which changed a couple times as people moved in and out. My buddy helps him out by giving him copies of the multiple emails that we sent to get them to fix the septic and the damage it did to the house. Told my buddy he would let us know how they wanted to proceed. Never heard from the company again. Someone I knew had a pro deo case where she had to defend a person who had been charged with a criminal offense. Don't know what. Confidential and whatnot. Even though the police and could pretty much pinpoint the crime to her client, there was no evidence to tie him to the crime. Circumstantial at best. She had instructed him to shut up and let her do the talking during the trial. As from experience, the client sometimes does not know how to answer a question properly. She pleads and can show that the court has nothing on her client. She feels that for once, a pro deo case is going her way. After her plea, the judge thanks her for her plea and turns to her client. He asks if the client had something to add to the plea. Client looks at her, back at the judge, tears well up in his eyes and he blurts out, "I'm so sorry, I'll never do it again." She threw her notes and everything else she had in her hands at the client. Now convict. Apparently, she basically got screwed by her own client, who screwed himself even worse. Pro deo is the old term in our jurisdiction. Same connotation as pro bono. This ain't my first pro deo. Well, not my story, but a prior boss's story. They had a drunk driver kills a car worth of people case at the time when they were a general practitioner. My boss was representing the family that got hit. One where the 2 kids and the wife had died, but the father had not, and wanted the college guy's drunk driving skin to be mounted on a wall. This was back before Facebook was commonly used in court proceedings and before tons of people realized that crap is too great for any attorney worth their weight in salt to pass up. So, the kid, drunk driving college kid, had managed to get the judge's sympathy during the first part of the hearing by saying he was sorry, haunted, never going to drink again, this was going to ruin his life, etc. The judge seemed to really be eating it up. Then comes my boss and immediately burns this kid's remorse to the ground by showing numerous Facebook statuses and photos of them binge drinking, partying, and even joking about driving drunk from the date of the accident up until a night ago. The kid looked like he was being forced to swallow hot coals and the judge was absolutely livid. Needless to say, the kid had to do way more than just apologize and be remorseful after that. Here's kind of an anti-story for balance. My marriage with my ex-wife fell apart a while back and she probably cheated on me and I probably drank too much to be a good husband and we argued and separated. It could have gotten messy at this point if either of us decided to be vindictive, but at this point we knew it was over and our main priority was the kids. Custody was never an issue because the older kids could choose where they wanted to stay at any given time. They chose to stay with me most of the time. and although we arranged a timetable for the younger kids they could come and go as they pleased if they were staying with friends in the neighborhood, etc. Child support was also not an issue as I'm not a dong and I'm happy to pay my share towards giving them a decent life. I don't count what it costs when they're with me and I pay half towards school costs, clothes, outings, etc. On the morning of the divorce proceedings we met for coffee before going before the judge. The judge proceeded to ask us what contracts we had signed for the mortgage, custody, child support, etc. And we just said none. We had it worked out. The judge was incredulous and asked several times, "Are you sure? This is highly irregular." We still have occasional arguments on the details that we have to work out as adults, but yeah. Tomorrow I might get in from work to find one of the younger kids in front of the TV in an unscheduled visit, or I might get a text for half the cost of a school outing next week, and that's all fine by me. Honestly, this is incredible. Really refreshing after this really sad thread. I was litigating a custody dispute on behalf of the mother in an incredibly conservative jurisdiction. One of the most common ways to get custody was to allege frick or pee addiction because the threshold for it was basically non-existent. For this hearing, however, we lucked out with the judge, who I knew from other cases. Opposing counsel tried to gotcha me into settling before the hearing by showing me surprise obscene texts between mom and her new boyfriend. This is, of course, not law and order and you can't introduce surprise evidence. So we go through with the hearing. I object to the obscene texts, but say I would allow them to be read into the record, in their entirety. So the uptight, very conservative local attorney gets to spend the next 25 minutes or so reading obscene texts in open court, occasionally asking if she could gloss over parts, but no, I didn't feel it would be appropriate. I'll never forget hearing her struggle with the word nipple. It's not even a dirty word. But this was like the third hearing we had to amend custody because this guy felt his ex-wife having a boyfriend meant she was a frick addict. They alleged the obscene texts happened while the kid was in mom's custody, but they based that on the timestamp of the screenshots. The timestamp on the texts was clearly at a time when the kid was not even around and mom was safe to get freaky over the phone. The judge had heard enough of his balls and awarded attorney's fees and put in the order, consistent with the vexatious litigant statute, that if dad would continue to be liable for her attorney's fees if he kept pushing this crap. It was the only joy I got from practicing family law. Not a lawyer, but I sat on the jury of a man who was accused of molesting his 10-year-old niece. He elected to testify in his own defense and his defense was, "I did it, but it was her idea." It was his third felony strike, so he will be spending, with luck, the rest of his life in prison. Not a lawyer, but this story always gets me. My biological grandmother died 20 years ago of ovarian cancer. She left all her money, trusts, bonds to my grandfather to use while alive and disperse after death. My grandfather remarried something like 15 years ago to my step-grandma. My grandfather ended up dying first a few years back. My step-aunt is a greedy bee who lives on the opposite side of the country. She's lived off of her mother and my grandfather for all of her life. She'd come over and take them on vacation where she'd use their money to buy herself things and get a free skiing trip about 8x a year. After my grandfather passed, my step-grandma had to move where her children live to get care for dementia. My step-aunt has access to not only her own mother's estate but my grandfather's as well to take care of her needs. That wasn't enough. She decided to try and sue my dad and uncle for their dead biological mother's estate. My dad is bilaterally paralyzed and in a wheelchair. My uncle is a triple bypass survivor with a pacemaker and multiple stints. Both are on fixed disability income. The court date came and I literally wheeled my dad in while my uncle walked with a cane. My step-aunt is entirely able-bodied and rolling in the millions my step-grandma and grandfather worked their whole lives to earn. The judge took one look at the whole picture and she was absolutely denied access to my biological grandmother's estate. We were there for less than an hour. Dog, absolutely frick your aunt. Not caught, but live PD traffic stop I was watching and the guy told the officer I have caffeine pills in my back pocket, gets them out, puts them on the hood. Everyone's chill. Dude then comes clean and says it's Molly and the officers look at each other and go, "Do we even have a test kit for that?" Other officer says no. Dude's face just shows he should have kept his mouth shut. I was a very new lawyer with no bankruptcy experience. A partner sent me to bankruptcy court to try to make a claim as a creditor related to a $50 million building that was being sold. Time and lack of knowledge will prevent me from accurately describing everything that went down, but I will do my best. The court handled my client's claim very quickly and easily at first. The court ruled we were not a creditor because our claim was against a tenant, which was correct. Note, we had purchased the claim from someone merely to try to somehow wedge our way into buying the property, which was very transparent to the court, so I could just sit back for the remainder of the hearing and watch the two premier bankruptcy attorneys go at it. One represented the debtor and the owner of the building. The other represented a secured creditor with a lien against the building. They absolutely hated each other on a personal level, and were arguing with great venom about the plan to sell the real estate. There was a small break in the action while the judge took care of another matter. When we came back, the secured creditor attorney told the court the following. 1. His client, the creditor, had purchased controlling interest in the debtor, the owner of the building. 2. He had been directed to fire the other attorney. 3. He had been directed to withdraw the motion to sell the real estate. 4. He then did both there in the courtroom. I have practiced for almost 3 decades. It was the most bad bust thing I had ever seen, and was particularly noteworthy because the courtroom was packed with other attorneys watching, and those two attorneys absolutely hated each other. Not a lawyer, but this happened to my family. My husband's kids asked us to fight for full custody after years of systematic abuse from their mom. My stepdaughter was physically shamed and assaulted, and mom decided to marry a guy who was best friends with the guy who assaulted her. Mom never told us what happened, never got her counseling, never reported it to the police. In mediation, she brought up a conversation I had with her which she denied ever happening until then. She started saying lie after lie, and all my husband had to say was, my wife had that conversation with you to explain how uncomfortable my daughter is living with this man because he is connected to her sexual assault. The mediator was not amused. She said, you have someone living in your house who is connected to your daughter's assault. Your relationship with your children is broken. She spent the rest of the session sobbing and signed away custody because this was just the tip of the iceberg that we had on her, and she knew it. Hearing her sobbing made me so happy after all she put these kids through. I had to walk my stepdaughter into the police station to report her physically shaming and assault. I usually don't want people to suffer, but after warning her this guy was coming between her and her kids and then her lying about the context of that conversation, I'll make an exception. I tried to stop her from the chain of events that led us to court, and she tried to use it against me. It's so sad that adults will put other people before their own children. It disgusts me. Good on you guys for getting the kids and that poor girl out of that environment. Not someone else, but himself. The guy and his lawyer missed court appearances, sometimes one of them, sometimes both, with little or no warning and with suspect excuses. It started getting ridiculous, and we kept pointing out holes in his story. Like he said he left for another country without knowing about the appearance, but his lawyer stood in court and said he told him beforehand. Or all of a sudden he was in a former Soviet bloc country for fertility treatments and it would ruin everything if he came back now. Or when he was visiting dying relatives on another continent. Or he was going to the airport when he had to rush to the hospital and showed us an admitting form in another language that we translated. It showed he was there but also that he was discharged. He also tried firing his attorney and saying he needed more time to brief a new attorney, who at the next appearance would say he hasn't been able to talk to his client so he needs to adjourn. Or that he hasn't been paid and his client is basically in butt and he needs to be relieved. We kept saying to the judge he was doing it to stall, but the judge kept giving him the benefit of the doubt. We even showed him other cases where he skipped appearances and the judges threatened sanctions. Until finally he didn't show up for an appearance where the judge had specifically told him, I don't care if you're meeting with the Pope, I'm ordering you to be here. Boom, his answer was stricken. Default judgment in full was granted to our side. Neither he nor his lawyer showed up for the hearing where the judge determined exactly how much of a judgment we should get, and then had the nerve to file a motion that the judgment was unfair because he didn't get a chance to dispute anything. I remember when I was a kid my dad got a ticket for running a stop sign. He decided to fight it because the stop sign was buried in a bush and wasn't visible from the road. He and the police officer that had issued the ticket both arrived to court at the appointed time, but the judge wasn't there. After they waited for about 20 minutes, the bailiff finally apologized and told them they could go home and things would be rescheduled. Just after they had left, the judge finally arrived and found both my dad and the police officer in contempt for leaving and wasting her time. $180 traffic ticket became $2.500 contempt of court fines. About 5 years later, a friend of mine pulled the same judge for a DUI. Prescription, not booze. He didn't realize he shouldn't be driving on them. He just went without any counsel. He said that she said if he was stupid and ought to try to represent himself, he could sit there and not say anything, so he ended up just sitting there and not saying anything and lost his license for a first offense DUI. There were more than one news article and letters to the editor about what a disaster of a judge she was, so I'm sure a lot of other people had similar issues with her. Not a lawyer, but my personal story. When I was 4, I had 3 older siblings. My brothers were 10 and 13. My sister was 7. My dad was fighting for custody of all of us, as we currently only spent weekends at his. But during that time we would all complain about what bad things would happen during the week with our mother. Ultimately, the judge ruled that the kids were old enough to decide where they wanted to be. My sister would make my choice for me. My mum knew for a fact she would lose all of us this way. She was aware all of us preferred our dad. It's at this point she stands up in court and says, "You can have all of them, but me isn't even yours, so you can't have her." My entire family were there. Nobody had any idea why she would say such a thing. A lot of people are crying and my dad is in a state of shock. Because of this, the judge orders a DNA test to be done. But either way, the kids still get to choose at the next court date, as his name is present on all of our birth certificates. I guess she forgot that day. The judge gives this extra time due to the state my dad is in, just in case this changes anything for him, and whether he will still want custody of me under these new circumstances. Now, it should be noted that my mum was not fond of any of us, especially the boys, to which she already knew they were a lost cause. But she would no longer receive benefits or money from my dad, so she needed some kids around at least. She took this time to convince my sister that with her brothers gone, she would be able to afford all of the things she wanted. Ice cream, toys, later bedtimes, you name it. My brothers chose my dad. My sister chose my mum. I had a pretty rough upbringing because of her decision, and to this day she regrets it. She was never treated differently. No treats, no toys. It turns out my mum wasn't lying though. He wasn't my biological father. According to my family, this was a huge weight on him for a very long time. He remained an incredible father in my life, but sometimes something would happen that would cause an odd or upsetting reaction out of him. And that's the sole reason why. It really changed his and my life. I'm sorry if any of the terms I used were incorrect. Not a lawyer after all. That's fricked up. I'm sorry you had to deal with that. I have been in dispute with British Gas for around 10 years. Every now and again they take me to court. Every time I win and we go away for another few years. The last time I lawyered up, it's in a magistrate's even though it's a civil matter. My solicitor waited for the British Gas guy to swear his oath to tell the truth, the whole truth, etc. Then asked him what he knew of the previous court cases. When the guy said he didn't know anything about them, my solicitor ripped into him saying he just claimed to tell the whole truth, so clearly nothing he says can be trusted. It went on for a few minutes. It was kind of brutal. The magistrates agreed and we walked away with £600 in costs. It was a joy to watch this bloke who was all, "We're coming to make entry to your house and the police will help," before we went in be told to sit down and not say anything else unless he was asked a question. To fend off some of the questions, it's to do with a disconnected meter at my house, for electric to a closed shop. I have written to the CEO. I've had my MP involved and been to court 4 times. British Gas don't change. Don't listen, so I've given up. I'll just go to court every now and again and claim my £600. I just remembered they had to transfer the money electronically as we were going to send the bailiffs in, as they took 27 days to pay. TBH, I was a little disappointed when they paid up. BG took my grandparents to court for non-payment of bills. My grandparents owned their house from new. Never had mains gas. Everything was electric, including the heating. There was no connection, no meter, no nothing. Having tried to explain this calmly a few times on receipt of early bills, my granddad quite enjoyed his day in court. Not a lawyer, but I was a jury foreman on a case about 5 years back. Guy was accused of attempting to kill his girlfriend. Various charges up and down the severity were filed. However, victim's testimony wasn't terribly convincing, especially after cross, and there was only evidence that something had happened at the house that night, but not necessarily that the BF had done it. Anyway, defense is turned to present, and they unexpectedly recess for the day. We come back the next day, and the defendant testifies. He puts himself at the scene, and admits to hitting her. We ended up convicting him of everything but attempted murder if I remember right. Afterwards, the judge came into the jury room and told us that the unexpected recess the previous day was because the defendant insisted on testifying against his lawyer and the judge's advice. If he hadn't testified, basically no chance we would have convicted him. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Ian, but my parents got divorced a few years ago. TLDR. At the bottom. Short as possible backstory. My dad's a narcissistic prick who emotionally abused us all growing up. Mum was a Sam until I turned 16 and entered the workforce at minimum wage. Worked up to management. Dad worked a trade job at an auto company, making 3-4x as much as her, in the 6 figures. At the beginning of proceedings she tried to settle early on. She basically wanted enough to cover healthcare, because that was her biggest worry financially. He basically wanted to give her nothing. Things got very nasty. He hired a horrible "see you next Tuesday" of a lawyer, who would constantly insult my mother to her face. This pushed mom to ask for much more than she originally wanted. Dad was told by his lawyer mom wouldn't get a penny. After a year of battle, judge hand down final judgment. Dad has to pay $1,500 a month. 3 days after judgment, my younger sister is at dad's house. Mom picks her up, asks why he hasn't gone to work yet. Sister goes in to check on him. She finds him barely breathing with vomit all over. He had acetaminophen poisoning. There was an empty bottle of hydrocodone acetaminophen and another big bottle of Tylenol on his nightstand. The doctors said there was no way to be 100% how much he had taken because he went to bed early and my sister hadn't seen him for over 12 hours. But with the amount still in his blood and the degree of organ failure, they could say with 70% sure it was an intentional overdose. He did all of this before putting his brand new car in his name alone, and before any other payments to mom went through, besides splitting the sale of our house. And now, you're probably thinking there's no way a person could attempt suicide only out of spite. There was no note or anything. But when fighting with his sisters over who would make his medical and financial decisions, which is a whole other story, we found out he wrote his sister a check for $75,000 with a note saying don't let the girls have this, meaning my mom and sisters. Ford is still going after my mother for the car payments. The county administrator, edit, a judge decided to put a third party in charge of all decisions concerning him since it was contested. Waited nearly 2 years before letting it get repossessed. Her credit was tanked. My sister, who was only 16 at the time, is still dealing with PTSD from finding him, and this wall of text was just a short version. But my dad is still living with the side effects. It's basically like he had a very bad stroke. He's in an assisted living facility and none of his kids have anything to do with him anymore. TLDR. Attempted suicide to get out of alimony payments is the worst thing I've seen someone do to screw someone else over in court. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.